Ready to challenge what you think? Every week on Rise Radio Podcast, we ignite powerful dialogue about belief, social narratives, prophecies, and spirituality, grounded in biblical apologetics with expert guests, bold questions, and unexpected insights. We aim to contextualize our culture and bring clarity. This isn't about small talk. It's big questions answered. Rise Radio Podcast. Let the truth rise.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Rise Radio Podcast, both visually on YouTube on the Rise channel, and this will also be on the Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So hello to everyone, however you're listening or watching today. We have a very special guest with us. His name is Pastor John Haller. Some of you will have seen his stuff online. He comes from FB
Fellowship Bible Chapel.
Fellowship Bible Chapel, yeah. So it's a great thing to have you on the show with us, John, and we've got a lot to talk about. We also had people sending in questions. So towards the middle of this interview discussion, I will go to the questions that people sent in. Online, there's another round of people predicting the rapture on September the 23rd. What do you think about that?
You know, this, it seems to be that they're mostly attached to the Feast of Trumpets, these predictions. You know, I'm not really that impressed with them, although I do think when we get to the end of the period before Jesus' return, some of these things are going to happen that will fulfill the feast. But I think the fulfillment of the fall feast will be just like the fulfillment of the springs feast at Jesus' first coming. And those feasts were fulfilled in exact date order. They weren't spread out by years or anything like that. So I think it's a problem when you take the Feast of Trumpets, and I believe in a rapture, but I think you can make the case that the time period at the end, just before the Lord's return, there may be a rapture 10 days before the Day of Atonement. I kind of think the Lord returns on the Day of Atonement, but I just don't know if you can be separating them by, roughly 7 years. So I see all the calculations, and I know the date between the Feast of Trumpets this year on September 23rd and the Day of Atonement in 2032 is 2,550 days. And that's kind of an interesting thing. But then again, you have to assume that there's at least a 7-year gap between a Feast of Trumpets rapture and the Lord's return on a Day of Atonement or some other day. So, but at his first coming, the pattern I think that was established was all of the feasts that were being fulfilled by Christ in that last week of his life. There weren't years between the fulfillment of those feasts. And so I think that pattern will probably occur in the future. And then the question becomes, does this rapture occur on a feast day or not? That's the big question. It's kind of interesting, though, between Feast of Trumpets and the Day of Atonement, that those are called the days of awe, which I think could relate to if that's the way it happens at the end. And I'm not saying that I know that it will, but if it does, those days of awe could be a period of time where the Lord pours out his wrath in a pretty severe way.
What do you think the main danger is when people start making these specific date predictions? Do you think it could throw people's faith off if they truly believe that this is real?
Sure. I mean, I have heard people say, mainly from pre-trib camp, who I love, I spent a lot of time with them. I grew up in a pre-trib church and in college, but I don't know, it wasn't emphasized then the way that it is now. But I think there is a fear. Look, I believe apostasy means falling away from the faith. You cannot fall away from something you're not part of. And so I think that people who try to soften the meaning of apostasy or say, well, it applies to this group or that group and not us, I think that's a rather dangerous perspective to take. And I have seen pre-trib teachers, very well-known ones, say, look, if it's not a pre-trib rapture, I'll go insane, I'll lose my mind. And I think that's that type of attitude is it's fraught with danger, spiritual danger, in my opinion.
Yeah, do you think there's a real need for people who are believers to prepare for hard times that could come in the future, and that maybe that could sort of dissuade them from seeing the value of suffering as well that's taught in the Bible?
Well, there is, I do think that we're going to need, if I'm right about how this thing unfolds, yeah, we're going to need some good teaching about suffering, standing firm in the faith and for the Lord. But, I think back to remember those guys in the orange jumpsuits on the beach in Libya? ISIS took them out there to behead them. And it was kind of funny, the discussion that I had with some people about that, like, wow, this is guys standing for their faith. And, immediately go, oh, they're Coptic Christians and Coptics have this bad theology and that bad theology. And I'm like, yeah, but at that moment when, they're all saying Jesus as they're being beheaded. So maybe they had some bad theology leading up to that. That's not the point. The point is, what did they believe as their life was taken? So I thought it was a good thing, and then there's a passage in Matthew. It says, don't worry about what to say on that day, that the Holy Spirit will guide you. So I think that we need to, rely on the Lord for that promise that the Holy Spirit will guide us into what to say in those particular situations. Right. It will be stressful. And listen, I have, in our house, we have always prepared, with, some food storage and that type of thing, nothing extreme. But, look, we just went through sort of a crisis exercise around the world over the last 5 years with that. I refer to it as Charlie Vector 019er, so I can get around the censors of our YouTube betters. And so, there was indications there that, people ought to maybe take some preparatory steps just as a practical matter for anything. We live in a world where there's threats of war, and Russia and China threaten us with EMP attacks. And if you look at the studies that have been done on an EMP attack where it destroys the power grid, in the United States, they said within 6 weeks or 2 months, 90% of everybody is dead. So I just think, you have a responsibility to take care of your family. So you ought to make some reasonable steps. And I know everybody can't afford it, but make some reasonable steps to be prepared. But you need to be not just physically prepared, but also spiritually prepared, because it's getting very strange out there. I mean, I look at what's going over in the UK, and I have a lot of friends over there and do regular interviews with them, and have been over there a couple times, and it's rather shocking to what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, things are changing quite a lot in this time, and there's a lot of tension here as well with the hotels that are being used to house people who come on boats. There's a lot of social tension between people, so definitely see that building up in this time, and just a general hatred for Christianity, maybe from some of the media outlets and the more woke stuff. So
yeah, man, I've interviewed Trevor Loudon has been quite good on the red-green axis, the communist, Islamic, leftist axis that's sort of, right now they're united together. Eventually they'll turn on each other, I think, if they get too much power. But it's happening here. But I remember in 2018, we went to England for the first time. And we spent, 5 or 6 days in London at the end of before we came back. And I remember we got to our hotel in London. It was the Marriott Marble Arch. We're 4 blocks from Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park. And there were 50 TV stations available on the cable in the hotel room. 10 of them were Arabic. And honestly, I've been in Judea, Samaria, what's called the West Bank. I saw more burqas in London around my hotel than I did at Nablus in Samaria in the West Bank. That was 7 years ago. So when I saw, I think, a Guardian article or Times, I read the Times of London. One of them had an article recently that said that the population of the UK had gone up 700,000 last year. Well, that's not from a birth rate increase. Birth rates are declining. So there's a lot of people coming into the UK. And we've had the same thing here in the United States. Millions of people. Here locally, we've had a couple 100,000 Muslim Somalians have settled here in the Columbus, Ohio area. So, yeah. And I'm not a racist, you understand, but I also know it's a problem. It's a big problem.
Yeah, I suppose you see a difference between legal and illegal immigration, right? So
I don't think any American that I know is against all immigration. They want legal immigration in an orderly fashion. That's not what we had during the Biden, what I call the O'Biden administration. It was, the doors were open and people flooded in.
Well, I mean, I see in Jesus talks about how the nation and kingdom in the verses about the last days. So, I mean, there seems to be some of that tension, at least in society, doesn't there?
Sure. And, and I think sometimes it's by design that they try to get the groups going at each other.
Yeah. So it's been, I don't know, I did meet you once, must have been about 6 years ago, was it?
Yeah, I think that was that 2018 trip up around Derby. There was a conference that I was at. Yeah, that was 2018.
So that's in those few years, things have changed drastically, haven't they, in the world? And I was going to ask you to start off, before we go on to these questions from the viewers, like what would you say is your main concern or focus at the moment in terms of the world we live in and the Bible prophecy?
Well, I try to take a sort of a broad spectrum approach. So many years ago, I don't remember when, probably I did a conference in Canada about 2021. I came up with a grid through which I sort of analyzed the news because, there's the accusation against people who look at the news and talk about Bible prophecy is that you're engaged in newspaper exegesis. And I think that's kind of a weak argument against people that do what I do, because the prophecies that we've seen that have been around for thousands of years, those are going to unfold in a real world where people live. And so the question is, and sometimes it's kind of a tricky question, is this the time? So I sort of made up a grid for myself. It has the initials ACLU, acceleration for A, convergence for C, logistics for L, and understanding for the U. Now, ACLU, of course, is American Civil Liberties Union, so I just did that so we can remember it. But I think let me just explain briefly where I'm coming from. So the acceleration, we're going to see things happening more quickly. And I think that's happening on many, many levels, as we see, for example, the extreme rise in, I don't like the term anti-Semitism. I prefer the term Jew hatred. The rise of Jew hatred around the world and on both sides of the political aisle. Like here in the United States, you've got the leftists and you have what's now being called the woke right. It's shocking to me. It's and it's every day, and it's an assault. And so I open my, I have an account on X, and I open my X feed, and it's just a sewer of Jew hatred. It's unbelievable. And now there are very influential media people with millions and millions of followers like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens. But every week, I'm telling you that somebody else joins the crowd.
Yeah.
And so in America, we have, I'll call it the MAGA right, make America great, make America great again, right. And they were very instrumental in getting Donald Trump elected. And it's been a big fight here for a dozen years, at least, as Trump came into prominence. And whether you like him or not is not the point. But I think I said to somebody today in an interview, if Donald Trump were in for office right now, I don't think he would even get the Republican nomination. And the main reason for that would be twofold. He seems to be waffling on being totally on Russia's side in the Russia-Ukraine war. And he helped Israel by bombing the Iranian reactors with our massive GBU bombs that had never been used before. And so on the mega right, I'm telling you, I watch Steve Bannon's War Room when I'm out and about. I'll listen to a little bit of it. I can hardly stand it anymore because the palpable Jew hatred and it's everywhere. So Trevor Loudon, who I've interviewed, the red-green axis, I think he's nailed it quite well. And he believes, and I agree with him, that this is largely a Russian propaganda effort to divide, for example, America, who they view as their biggest enemy. And it's working, believe me. So I listen to this stuff, and you would not believe the stuff they're saying about Donald Trump because he helped those Jews bomb Iran.
Well, do you think this is leading towards the fact that the Bible says that the world will come against Israel? I mean, it seems like it's coming from all angles.
Right. And I think that it's already there. I mean, so we'll see on a geopolitical side, only a total, complete moron would think, if you've been to Israel, I've been to Israel, I know you've been there, only a complete moron would think that a two-state solution would work. And what do we see now? 80, 90 countries in the world, they're going to have a meeting in just a month, about 4 or 5 weeks from now, to try to shove a two-state solution down Israel's throat. I mean, Macron was meeting with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who everybody's hopeful that he'll kind of not do that. But, I personally think that the future king of Saudi Arabia sort of might be a moderate influence on that claim, but he's also from an Arab tribal culture, and his father has been big on pushing this two-state solution for 25 years. Ever since, the Arab Peace Initiative in early 2002, just a few months after 9/11. So I think until he dies, I don't think you'll see a dramatic change from the Crown Prince. And he will do it at great risk. So we have the acceleration, things happening more and more quickly. And by the way, there's sort of a biblical basis for that. So the one thing that, I've learned through some of my friends who are much better teachers than I, that prophecy is pattern. Jewish eschatology, the scriptures are Jewish oriented as Old Testament, and all the writers were Jewish in the New Testament for the most part. Jewish eschatology is a little bit different than the way we would normally think of it as in our Western Romanized, Hellenized mind. They have a different view of it, and they look at patterns. So let me give you a couple examples. So on the acceleration thing, Jesus, when he came at his first coming, there were many, many prophecies that were to be fulfilled. About 60% of those were fulfilled in the last week of Jesus' life before his death, burial, resurrection, and ascension. So in that last week, 60% of the prophecies were fulfilled. Well, is that a pattern for how things are going to go as we approach the second coming of the Lord? And I think they are. You'll see a large percentage of those prophecies fulfilled in a very short, compressed period of time. So that's the acceleration. Then the convergence is all of these things are happening. We have geopolitics, we have Israel back in the land, we have growing apostasy and false teaching in the church, acceptance of unbiblical lifestyles and that sort of thing. And all those things are happening at once. And it's almost like if you stop to breathe or think about it, or for somebody who does what I do, you're away from it for a half a day, you come back and it's like, I don't know if I can get caught back up. And I'll do, a prophecy update talking about things that I think are important in the news relative to Bible prophecy. And it's impossible to keep that anymore to an hour and a half. It could be 2.5, 3, 4, 5 hours. Sometimes I've just threatened to go up there and just kind of open my phone and start opining on things that are in my news feed and go for 3 hours. And that's not hard, but that's the convergence. Then there's the logistics part. There's certain things in prophecy, like what's this Babylon that we read about in Revelation 17 and 18, and how does that come about? Where's that located? What are the logistics? So people see, for example, I'm not dismissing that Babylon could be rebuilt in Iraq. Yeah, that's possible. Okay. And there's some things happening there. They're building a port, but the port is 350 miles south of the ancient site of Babylon. And they're talking about putting a canal in, and this canal will come in, and the railroad and everything, this will replace the Suez Canal. But I don't, I'll just be honest with you, looking at it from a military perspective, if the Houthis that can barely feed themselves, they've lost 800,000 in the civil war in Yemen over the last, I don't know how many years, and they can't feed their people, but they have these missiles, and they shut down a lot of the shipping and through the Suez Canal. Well, can't they shut down the shipping through a canal and railroad and that type of thing that's built through Iraq, or the new one that we have coming from the Caspian Sea through Azerbaijan, Armenia to Turkey, and then on to Europe? Ukraine yesterday bombed or took out a major oil pipeline that supplies a lot of countries in Eastern Europe. So that's the question. Is there's this, to me, I look at it and I'm like, how does that happen? And I'm not saying it won't happen in Iraq, but I'm just saying is that maybe it's someplace else, and maybe it's something we haven't really thought about. And then we look at, and then we think about, we always talk about the mark of the beast. And when I was growing up, it was a tattoo or a barcode or a QR code or something like that would be put on your skin. And now we have this incredible development of computer technology, which has just exploded in the last year. But I was sitting at the Israeli government has a Christian media summit for people who, they bring in people who are pro-Israel. And I was sitting there, and they had a business guy talking about the Abraham Accords. And he was, Israel is very big on the Abraham Accords. This was going to result in $50 billion of investment, which is now ratcheted up to over $1 trillion expectation in Israel that they'll get with these relationships with various Arab countries. And I think you can make a case this is extremely prophetic. But when I was sitting there, this is December of 2022, I had not heard about it. I'd been traveling that week, and the business guy speaking, Jonathan Medved, you can find the video on the Israeli government press office, GPO YouTube channel. He said, "Have you guys seen this ChatGPT? This is unbelievable what it can do. 1 million downloads in a week since it was rolled out last week. And it's going to do all this stuff. And we got this artificial intelligence coming." And so I'm sitting there in a hotel room in Jerusalem, and we know that this Antichrist figure who comes is pseudo Christos. He's in place of Christ. He tries to take the place of Christ. And so Jonathan Medved, and I know he didn't know what he was saying, but he said, look at what they're going to do with this AI and other computer technology. We will make the lame walk, is exactly what he said. And when he said that, I literally got chills because I'm sitting in Jerusalem at a hotel on Mount Scopus. And you go out on the deck and you can overlook the city of Jerusalem. And we've got a guy who's talking about technology making the lame walk. And at the same time that this is going on, Neuralink was rolling out some of its first introductory videos. And if you look at the sequence, it was the lame walk, the blind see, the deaf hear. And I immediately thought of the passage in back in the Gospels where the disciples of John the Baptist were sent to Jesus by John the Baptist and say to Jesus, "Are you the one, or should we look for another?" And Jesus said, "You go back and you tell John what you see. The lame walk, the blind see, the deaf hear." And immediately I started making this connection. This is different. And I think a lot of this is directly related to the mark of the beast technology. For example, Patrick Wood, very smart guy, been studying transhumanism and technocracy for many years. He made an interesting comment a couple of years ago. He said, when we get into this final period, we're not going to see. So I think there's pretty much agreement that there's this significant event that takes place, the abomination of desolation. And in Revelation 12:13, it talks about the mark of the beast being rolled out then. And Patrick made a good point. Is he said it's not like the abomination of desolation will take place, and then the Antichrist and false prophet will sit down and say, how do we crowdfund the development of a control system for all of this? And he said, no, it's going to be there ready to go, and they're just going to literally flip the switch. So I think we need to be looking at this. Now, I do think that all of this stuff that's been set forth before, it's different now. It's very, very different with the development of these technologies. And one of the big proponents of this, it's coming out of the Trump administration. And this thing, I don't see this thing stopping. I just see this thing going forward at rather alarming speed. I mean, I live in Columbus, Ohio. Near me, there are data centers. You can go out where it's kind of on again, off again. It's a big Intel is building a big chip plant, the largest one in the world. The initial phase is $25 billion of construction. The ultimate phase will be $100 billion. It's right just on the other side of the freeway from where Meta has a data center with 6 large buildings. Each of them is about as long. It's like sitting the Empire State Building on its side in a field, and there's six of them. They've spent, I don't know, $5-6 billion building these data centers. Amazon spent $20 billion. It said they're going to spend another $18 billion. This is just in this one area of Columbus. And then Google has spent about 8 or 10 and is planning on spending a similar amount of money again on data centers. I mean, this is like 15 or 20 minutes from my house. And all they are computers, processing information 24/7. So I saw a big article in the New York Times a few weeks ago about a data center being built in the process of constructed, 20 miles west of South Bend, Indiana, out in the Indiana farmland. And they have 6 giant buildings, and they're going to build 30 at this site. And this is happening all over the world, and the power needs. So I'm just saying I don't see how this thing stops. And then one of the big proponents of this is a guy named Peter Thiel, who was one of the founders of PayPal and big investor, probably worth $20 billion or more. and also with this company called Palantir, who's hoovering up all the data that the federal government has on us to organize it. And I'm just saying it's like this thing's happening with such incredible speed, and the processing ability that the computer processing ability, and whether it's good or not, it's everywhere that's intrusive.
Yeah,
So
we've had Patrick Wood on here before. Actually, it's very good to talk to him.
Okay.
Do you think the mark of the beast? Obviously, we don't know the specific details other than what the Bible clearly lays out, and that's something that's good to remember. That obviously it's going to be used for buying and selling, right hand or the forehead, and also connected to worship, right? But do you think that there's an element of spiritual?
Hold on just a second, because I think that's probably the most important part. It's tied to worship of the beast, of the Antichrist. That's kind of the critical thing. So if you're not seeing that, then I don't think what's going on is actually the mark of the beast, but it's the system and control grid that's being established. And so I don't know. I think you made a good point. Don't know exactly what that mark of the beast technology, the final implementation of it is. And that's probably why I believe that the church is here longer than a lot of other people do, because who's going to explain this to people? You know what I mean? You're going to remove every Christian from the planet, and then everybody's going to figure it out to protect themselves. I just have a little bit of a problem with how that works out. And I hope I'm wrong, by the way.
Yeah, I've seen there's also a mention of an angel, isn't there, that declares that this is the mark of the beast.
Yeah, and there's the two witnesses and the 144,000, and I will confess that I struggle with how this 144,000 thing comes about. I mean, I know it's there, but I'm sort of a process guy. I try to think through, okay, how do we get from nothing to 144,000? How long does that take? And so that's how I think about it.
Since we touched on the mark of the beast, do you think that there could be a spiritual element to the mark itself, like juxtaposed to the seal of God? Do you think that there could be a spiritual element to it, or are you just on the more of the technology transhumanist line alone?
Well, I look at the technology side, but certainly there's a huge spiritual component too. I mean, because the Bible's very clear that if you take this, you are condemned forever. And so there's a theological issue there that I think we need to work through. My personal way I sort of think through it is the unpardonable sin that Jesus talked about. And is it somehow that related to what happens with the worship of the Antichrist? And I don't know that that's connected, and I may be totally wrong, but that's how I process. I'm processing it.
Right, yeah, very good. And I think it's important you bring up AI, because I wanted to mention that to you as well. But we've talked a bit about it, and just how it could so easily blur the lines between what's true and what's not. It's like, how does after this we'll go on to the questions from the viewers, but how does a Christian navigate through a world where it's hard to even believe what's real or not, because AI becomes so realistic? Like, how do you navigate? Do you just turn everything off and just focus on the Bible? How do you do it?
Well, people really need to ask for God to guide them by the Holy Spirit, because it's difficult. I mean, I get these videos. It might be Donald Trump speaking. You can't tell that it's not Donald Trump. And I think what we're having, to be honest with you, is sort of a reversal of Babel. God confused the languages because, well, we need to do that to keep them from making themselves into gods. And now we're having a reversal of that. I mean, I watch videos. I use an AI tool. I'll watch, for example, Erdogan in Turkey. I think Turkey's incredibly significant in the geopolitical landscape of end times Bible prophecy. And so Erdogan, he's like Bible prophecy update or dream, because he never shuts up. And he and so he gives these speeches, and I download the speech, and I upload the video to this tool that I have. It processes the video, and I'm telling you, an hour speech, in less than 5 minutes, I have an English transcript of everything that he said. But the interesting thing was, he was talking with this Turkish guy on a Turkish media, but it was in perfect English, and it was like synced up with his mouth. So you couldn't tell that the original video of this was in Turkish. Mm-hmm. And so now the question is, can you rely on the tools? And I'm just telling you, the tools are really, really good. By the way, Christians can take this as well and translate their videos into a foreign language for evangelistic purposes. Mm-hmm. And the part of the problem is, I go to a small church, and we have a moderately popular YouTube channel. We have a pastor, and then I'm a teacher and an elder in the church, and we have a few tech people, but everybody's a volunteer. So and they all have jobs and everything. So we don't have the time. But with these AI tools now, all of a sudden, it's like we could be reaching people a lot of places, and people can go to YouTube and they can get closed captioning of what I say in English. They can get it in Farsi, they can get it in Turkish, they can get it in different African language, tribal languages, and everything like that. It's all done automatically now. So there's a good side to it. Yeah. But there's it's sort of like it's always balanced with the bad side.
It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? And
it is. And sometimes I think we at the church, we don't take advantage of it like we should. I mean, I'm sort of thinking out loud here. Like, I never thought I could do this with foreign language stuff on the Bible teachings that we put up.
YouTube, you can now enable it to translate audio to your video. So
no, I've not seen that yet.
Yeah, it actually does it in audio voices now. So
I wish you hadn't told me that, because now I'm going to be playing around, maybe watch it. Because sometimes I just I forget about it because it's foreign language and it's too much trouble.
Yeah,
but that's interesting. But listen, this is very, very important, because this was Babel at the beginning, Babel at the end. And the Lord intervened at some point. And I think we're getting to the point where you're going to say, okay, Lord, do something about this.
Mm-hmm. So it's just kind of riding the wave for good reasons while you can, until it gets too late. But right now, there's this maybe a window where we can actually use this to spread the gospel across the world to some of the most remote places in their language.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I've also contended for a while, and I don't have the technical expertise to do that. And I understand there are people working on developing it. We always hear about the dark web, right? Things that kind of people can get to them if you know how to unlock it. And I've contended for a while, why don't we have a dark web for Christians so we can communicate and fellowship with each other as these things kind of get a little bit more difficult going forward? But when you hear secular people talking about apocalypse, Armageddon, end times, Antichrist, and everything, it's sort of like, why doesn't a lot of the church just wake up and say, okay, we're here, we need to talk about this stuff? And it's kind of troubling to see that it's not.
So here's one for you before we move on. How do Christians spread the gospel when this stuff gets more and more advanced? Is there going to be like a particular way that Christians have to do that? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
It's going to be really important that what you see, if it's claiming to be Christian, is it tied to the text of Scripture? And and I've seen people saying, get a paper copy and keep paper copies of the Bible around. And I think I have a bunch of them, and I'm a really online guy. I mean, I've been doing technology as a trial lawyer for a long time. And by the way, a lot of these tools, these AI tools that are being rolled out to the public, we've been using earlier forms of these in the litigations to analyze massive amounts of data documents, emails, that type of thing. We've been doing this for 25 years. So it's just now that everybody's got it in their pocket. Like I said, there's a good side and a bad side to it.
Because you have to kind of cut into these things, don't you? As evangelistically, you have to kind of infiltrate into that kingdom to reach the lost souls that are in it, and hopefully pull them out for the Lord. So,
yeah, and I will tell you that this can be very deceptive. I'll be honest with you. I am glad I'm 71 years old. Because regardless of how this works out, I probably have a definitive exit date. My death is always imminent. When you get to this age, every week it's a friend from college died or this and that, and it's like, man. So that your time is limited. But I have great nieces. We don't have any children, but we have great nieces and great nephews that are 6, 7, 8 years old. And I'm like, man, what's the world like for them? It's tough. You got kids, and grandkids and stuff. It's a tough world. It's a tough world.
Yeah,
but God is faithful.
Yeah, that's very true. And that is our strength through it, isn't it? That we know that God is with us always. And the strength doesn't ultimately come from us. And that's something I keep my mind on. Because when we have the peace of God in Christ, it's just beyond anything the world can understand, isn't it? So
right. I don't live in fear, but I have a fairly conventional life and everything, but I know what's going on around me.
I mean, and I think there are a lot of people that are perhaps living in fear, and I've been one of them at times. So
sure, it's a stressful time to be alive. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's not easy at all seeing such things happen. We'll go on to a few questions we have before we finish.
Okay.
And sort of give maybe...
Sorry for droning on
it's been some really good stuff covered so far, and appreciate you coming on. We've got maybe a few minutes for each question.
Okay.
Laurie at Heart says, at what verse of Revelation does John Haller interpret Jacob's trouble beginning? I have wondered about Revelation 6, verse 12 to 17.
So let me sort of back up, and somebody asked me this question the other day, and they were sort of saying, well, you believe in the tribulation period. And I'm like, I don't use that term because I don't think it's a biblical term. So we're usually talking about the 70th week of Daniel, a period of 7 years, a week of years. I really try hard. I know that the common vernacular in the church is to call that the tribulation period, but I don't think that's accurate. I try to use the 70th week or the final week. And then we get into a lot of these other arguments about that. So the way I analyze it, I went back, and about 9 years ago, I started teaching about this because I was concerned about it. At least that's the earliest presentation I can find. So Jeremiah 30, verse 6 or 7, that talks about it is the time of Jacob's trouble. And sort of the defining part of that verse about that time is that it is a time like no other. So when I analyze it, it's sort of like, so are there any other scriptures that speak of it in that term? And when Jesus is doing his Olivet Discourse with his disciples in Matthew chapter 24, he talks about the abomination of desolation, which we can peg around the middle of that last week of years. So we always talk it's 3.5 years in. That's pretty accurate. And that's incredible. There's a lot of stuff happening around that time. But he says, and then will be great tribulation, such as the world has never seen, nor ever shall. And so you have the language that seems to track what says in Jeremiah chapter 30. So to me, that time of Jacob's trouble starts at or sometime just after that abomination of desolation event in Scripture. So I would put it in the last 3.5 years, not the whole 7 years, like a lot of my friends will do. I just don't think that that's the best biblical case could be made for that. And I'm a lawyer. I'll use the term like making the case a lot. So when she's talking about, she was like in Revelation 6, like 7 through 12 or 9 through 12. That's kind of interesting. So I think that what happens in Bible prophecy community a lot of times is that people decide on a rapture timing or something else, and then everything else kind of gets conflated to fit that timing view. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
It's a struggle not to do it yourself. And it's always easy to point out the shortcomings in somebody else's view, of course. But I think there's this conflation of things. So you have conflation of tribulation and wrath. So people say this whole tribulation period is the period of wrath because Jesus is opening the seals.
I've seen that, yeah.
But then you get into the question is, but are the seals confined to the 70th week? Or do they start before? And so my view of the seals, by the way, is like first seal opens, white horse. I'm not convinced that this is the Antichrist, rides forth conquering and to conquer. So conquering in the Greek really connotes that this is going to continue for a time. It's not that the seal opens and he's conquered everything. It's conquering and to conquer. So I sort of view each of the seals, the horsemen, as sort of a graph where the intensity kind of goes up over time, and it peaks at some time. They all converge, I think, at the second coming of Jesus Christ on the seals, so they continue out through the whole period after they're open, whether it's in that 70th week or not. When you have these views of eschatology, and we all love our charts and timelines and that type of thing. And my point is, make sure your timeline is in a computer program where you can easily edit it. So this time of Jacob's trouble, I think, is clearly after the abomination of desolation. It's a time like no other. And by the way, the command of Jesus is when you see this, then what? Flee, get out of town. And so it's kind of interesting that it talks about pray that it's not on Shabbat, on Sabbath, and that type of thing. And it's like that verse doesn't make any sense unless there's a Jewish state in control of Jerusalem at the time. And if you're in Jerusalem on Shabbat, you're not getting a bus, you're not getting a cab. So that sort of fleshes out what Jesus was talking about, that it was happening in Jerusalem. But so that it's that event that ticks off this wrath, and it's tied to flee. If all this stuff was wrath before, wouldn't Jesus be warning to flee? I think that's probably a reasonable argument to make. So when you get, and let me just finish, I know this, I probably drone on a little bit longer than you want.
Sure.
But in this Revelation 6, 7 through 12, it's kind of interesting because people who would hold to a pre-wrath timing like me would point to the sixth seal. And in the sixth seal, there are great earthquakes. Some became as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood. The stars of heaven fell. The sky receded like a scroll, and every mountain and island was moved out of its place. By the way, it's kind of an argument against this happening in 70 AD because this did not happen. You can't conflate what happened in 70 AD to fit this. And then it says, and the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, every slave and every free man hid themselves in the caves and the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand. Now, people try to say, well, they mean that it was going on for a while and they've just realized that this is the wrath. I don't think that's not what the Greek means that way. It's just not proper interpretation of the Greek. The redeemed people at the fifth seal don't see wrath. So that kind of indicates to me that trying to force the wrath all the way back to Revelation 6:1 is not a different period. Now, I'm not saying that the first period leading up to the abomination of desolation is a picnic, but there's certain things that are tied to that abomination of desolation. Flee, pray that it doesn't happen at this time, like on Shabbat or something like that. So I do think that the latter part of Revelation 6 shows the unfolding of the wrath.
Okay, and just to define terms for those that may be new to this, just in a couple of sentences, could you just explain what Jacob's trouble actually is?
Well, it is tied to the people of Israel. It's the time of Jacob's trouble. I think one pre-wrath person wrote a good article and said the time of Jacob's trouble is not just Israel's problem. So it's going to be on the whole world. This is not focused in Israel or anything like that. I just think that this is a period where God's pouring out his wrath and kind of dealing with mankind and the nation of Israel that's been largely gathered back in the land by that time. So
Right,
the Jewish people. So that's how I see it.
Yeah, so and obviously, as you said before, these things, you need to at least have the return of Israel in your eschatology to even understand some of these things. But
right. Well, for example, if I could just interrupt for a second, you look at like Ezekiel chapter 36. It talks about, I've sent you out to the nations because you were playing the harlot with the nations, you were unfaithful. And then he says, I'm going to bring you back to the land. Not because you deserve it, but because my name, my promise, my covenant is at stake that I made. So, and you're going to be brought back, and then I will give you a new heart. So it seems to indicate that they're going to be brought back in unbelief.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting as I'm watching things unfold in Israel, and I'll be in Israel in not too long. In 70 AD, a lot of things they lost, the temple, that type of thing, they're being restored. And we can argue whether that's a good or bad thing, but I'm sort of thinking now maybe it's part of the process because those things were to point to the Messiah, right? Well, then why don't we get prepared to use these things that are being restored in Israel and the archaeology everywhere that's showing that they were in the land, but that there's a rich prophetic, biblical, Messiah-based teaching that is arising out of all these discoveries and things that they're doing that point to the Messiah. So I know there's a tendency to say, "Oh, that's bad," we can't. But why don't we just use it to point them to the right place? That's what the tabernacle was for, right? That's what the temple was for. And so I'm not contributing to this, but I'm understanding what's going on. And it's inevitable. It's sort of like fighting against artificial intelligence. This stuff is going to happen. So let's use it to direct people the right way.
On the topic of the rapture, Kristen, a lady called Kristen sent this message in. I know that you said, I think you're more of a pre-Roth view, and there's others that are pre-trib and different views on the timings. But her question is more about the rapture in general. Is there such a thing as the rapture in the Bible? Because she said she went to church for many years and was never taught about anything to do with any rapture. So just quickly, could you answer?
Yeah, there is a thing called a harpazo. I mean, it's sort of a removal, I guess you could call it removal by force. Our friend Jacob's written a good book a very, very thick book on the harpazo. And that got interpreted through Latin as rapturo, which became rapture and that type of thing. So, yeah, is the word rapture? No, but the word harpazo is all over the place. And so, and there's also the episunagage, the word that means gathering. So I think we need to look at those passages. And I'm going to confess to you, a passage like 2 Thessalonians 2, we sort of start at verse 1 of 2 Thessalonians 2, and we forget that in the original Greek there was no chapter division. So 2 Thessalonians 1 was also part of it, and it just kind of flowed into. So sometimes we kind of break stuff out and we lose the meaning from the prior chapter. So you need to read all that as one piece. And I personally think they're rather difficult passages. But then again, people sort of take their conclusion about rapture timing, and then they kind of interpret the scripture to fit that view. I think it should be, let's look at the scripture. What does it say? And then we come up with the view. And we're all in this. So listen, whether you have the correct view of the rapture timing, I don't think it's going to make you miss the rapture when it happens. So look, if it happens like tomorrow, that's great. Then we can fellowship in the presence of the Lord. But if it's not like a lot of people think, we're going to go through some tough times. And so I think that's what we also need to be physically and spiritually prepared for.
Yeah, I mean, I remember growing up in a Baptist church here in the UK, and it was never mentioned in terms of rapture. It was just kind of comes to the end of the age, or you die, you're resurrected, and you meet Jesus for the judgment. So it's quite a new thing for me over the last 10 years, but I would say I'm probably of a similar view as you. And we've got one here from Sis Tara, and she mentions the Satan's Little Season timeline. She's asking basically the question, can you reaffirm what goes on in the 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ and the details about the Satan's Little Season? Now, also, I think this is good to mention to you because there's been a recent movement that's trying to say that we're in Satan's Little Season now.
I know.
So
I had not really heard of this till recently, by the way.
Yeah, same. Yeah. Can
so
you
do you want my opinion
biblically
on it? I'll try to temper my remarks. So let me back up and say there are different eschatological viewpoints. You would have preterism, it's all been fulfilled. You have historicism. We've seen this fulfilled throughout history. You would have futurism, it's going to be fulfilled in the future. And so I would say that to me, the correct view is the futurist view, but understand that things have been fulfilled and things have been fulfilled throughout history. So yeah, there's some things that would support a preterist view. There's some things that would support a historicist view. And there are things that are coming that will support the futurist view. So I think when you fall into it's got to be preterism and nothing else, that's where you get into, I mentioned earlier, you try to force your view into that particular word.
Right.
And preterism is problematic to me on steroids. It's not supportable factually or anything. I mean, in terms of everything wrapped up in 70 AD and Jesus returned and Satan was bound. Are you kidding me? Really? What was it that some of the old guys used to say? If Satan's bound, I want to know who keeps letting them go or put them on a very long chain.
Mm-hmm.
So I will say, I just probably in the last few months really started seeing some things about this Satan's Little Season, which I'll summarize as, well, the view is that Jesus came, the millennium happened, and now we're at the end of Revelation where Satan has been released for a season and he's gone forth to deceive the nations. And so what they say is the millennium, part of that deception, he's completely rewritten history to hide that the millennium has happened. And I just have to tell you, I don't know how to say it in a kind way. This view is the kindest thing I can say is this thing is not supported at all. I mean, we have a lot of historical records and that type of thing. So the theory is, the great cathedrals were built during the millennium. And so Satan's going to be released, and then there'll be a Gog-Magog war. I'm sorry. I just think this is rather lazy eschatology and looking at the scripture. So what we see in the millennium is, we see leading up to the millennium, we see the dramatic, unbelievable return of the Lord. It's going to be worldwide visible. This has never happened. That's why I can't accept the preterist view that it happened in 70 AD. And what they do, the preterists, 70 AD preterists, is they essentially turn Josephus into scripture, I think, which I think is a huge error because he wrote from a certain ideological perspective that, to be pro-Roman. So I cannot accept that preterism view, and certainly the Satan's little season. And then we have a passage that I think talks about a millennial temple in Ezekiel chapters 40 through 48. Where's that thing ever been? You're telling me that that's been hidden? I mean, go walk around the city of David and Israel. It's just, I don't understand how people accept it, to be honest with you. So there'll be a millennial kingdom. The nations will come. There's all these things. There's no proof that any of that has ever happened. Now, they'll say, well, Satan's deceiving you. Wait a minute. I'm a spirit-filled, blood-bought child and follower of Jesus Christ. You're telling me I'm deceived on all history and everything? That's a pretty arrogant statement to make, in my opinion. I don't see it. So hopefully I haven't offended someone. I hope they'll go think about it a little bit, because I don't see it.
Yeah, because it seems to be mixed with a lot of fables and mythology as well to come to that conclusion, because they start mixing mud floods and all these other stuff from online with it, don't they? So
yeah, I mean, listen, we live in a real world, not the Lord of the Rings trilogy. You know what I mean? I mean, made great movies, but it wasn't real. And the problem with that is, like, certain I use the term conspiracy theories, you cannot talk to people and reason with them about it. It's, so Jesus warned us, don't be deceived, and it operates on a lot of levels. And I know they'll point that back at me. That's fine. Do whatever you want with it. But I do think the Satan's little season thing is pretty hard to support. The millennium will be it's kind of a weird period. You got this temple, you got the nations, you got Israel, you got the Messiah ruling from Jerusalem. And then at the end, though, when Satan is released, this is kind of strange. There's this war, right? How does that come about? There's some people say, well, Ezekiel 38 and 39 describes Revelation 19. And I don't see that. Maybe a little bit of 39, but not all of it. It just doesn't make sense. And it's going to be a different world because, I mean, what's the power source? How do people have electricity and that type of thing? And people will be in their bodies, a lot of people. How do they eat? Is there farming? You understand what I'm saying? There's a lot of things I don't think we've thought through on that particular aspect, but it will happen and we'll be able to watch it unfold in front of us.
So just finally, a couple of sentences. The real interpretation of Satan's little season is that it happens at the end of the 1,000-year reign, literal 1,000-year reign, when Christ returns to establish his kingdom on earth. And it's just a short period of time when Satan's released again, and then he goes out to deceive the nations once more and draw people against Christ. And then the question would be, well, how long has he been out there deceiving the nations? Are we already beyond the short period of time, the short season? Because it's very convenient that they can kind of stretch this little season out to fit their particular narrative. I was watching some guys, and I have to tell you, it just didn't fit. Yeah, and the millennial view itself, just to touch on, is not just a dispensational view, is it? It's been, the early church actually believed in a literal 1,000 years as well. It's not just a Schofield recent thing. Yeah, so the way I've kind of looked at that is that, in the period of the Reformation, the church was in a pretty sorry state that the core doctrines of justification and sanctification had been corrupted. And so they needed to be reformed. But by the same token, views of eschatology, which are all part and parcel of the same thing, were probably corrupted too. And the fact that some of the development, redevelopment, reformation in eschatology came a little bit later, I think makes perfect sense. Yeah, because you had the change to the allegorical views around the time of Origen and Augustine, didn't you? So
Augustine was somebody did a message once called the Augustinian captivity of the church. It really changed a lot of things, and we're still paying the price for it. And I think, look, I have friends and stuff that hold to amillennial, post-millennial views and that type of thing, and allegorizing all of this stuff. And I still think they're believers, but we still have to bring them along with the whole counsel of God.
Yeah. And it's not an issue. It's not a salvational issue, is it? But,
right.
And I've got two more questions, and one will
Sure.
actually touch a bit more on that before we finish. We'll try and finish in the next maybe 15 minutes. Is that okay?
Sure. Yep.
So I've got one last question here online from Lucinda Graham, and she wrote quite a long message, so I'll kind of sum up one of the questions from it. She's just basically asking about the view you have regarding the events described in Revelation in the end times, and what that actually might look like for the people on earth, because they mention the chapter 16 with the 7 bowls of wrath, etc., and that it's described from the perspective of heaven. But what do you think that might look like for people who are on the earth? I mean, it's not nice to think about, really, is it? But
no, but we also know that the interesting thing is we've seen things like we've seen atom bombs drop, right, in real world. And there's this amazing capacity of human beings to survive. God sort of had built that into us. So there will be a lot of people who make it through. I think it'll be dramatically horrible. I think God will remove believers before that period of wrath, that very intense period of wrath, certainly protect them through it. And we know that there's a lot of people that enter into this millennial kingdom. So we know people survive. And I'm not saying that it will be any kind of a picnic or anything like that. But as we've kind of traveled around the U.S., and there's a lot of evidence around the U.S. of these big catastrophes, and yet people still survive. I mean, it's amazing. I grew up in a town that had a massive flood back in 1889, thousands of people killed, but a lot of people survived, even in the town where the flood came through. So, and the town's been flooded. And so I'm just saying is that I don't know exactly what it will look like. I think my personal view is that these bowls of wrath are poured out when Jesus returns in a very short period of time. And as I've kind of analyzed the timeline, we have these 3.5 years, time and half at times, and it's 1,260 days. But in Daniel, it talks about an extra 30-day period and an extra 45-day period. And we have all kinds of arguments about that. And so I've sort of come to the conclusion that Jesus returns at a Day of Atonement to fulfill that feast. And then there's this 30-day period of wrath that's poured out, and there's a cleanup period of 45 days. This is how I've sort of worked it out in my mind. And it's kind of interesting that if you go to the Day of Atonement on the Jewish calendar and you go forward 75 days, you will always be in the midst of another feast. Now, it's not a biblical feast, but it was one that Jesus recognized. It's the Feast of Dedication. And it's kind of interesting timing that 75 days from the Day of Atonement is the Feast of you're in the Feast of Dedication. Is that when this new temple for the millennium is dedicated? So I don't know if I've answered that question adequately. Listen, I know as a believer, what's the admonition that we're giving? Don't fear death. Fear the one who can destroy both body and soul in hell. That's what we should be afraid of, not dying, because when we die, that's kind of a victory for us because of what happens. So I think we always need to keep that in mind. And that's probably a pretty inadequate answer to a very long and well thought out question that she asked.
Yeah, thank you for answering these questions. It's not always easy to sum them up so quickly, is it? They're quite deep questions. So,
Well, no, I mean, people have written a lot of books about just parts of these questions.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah. I appreciate the quick fire round, and I just wanted to finish on this question with. I don't know if you've seen this as well. There's a bit of a phenomenon at the moment that some people are gravitating to, like the Eastern Orthodox Church, like kind of people online maybe that are more right-wing conservative in their views. There's some people that are gone there, and certainly I think the Eastern Orthodox Church has said their numbers have increased in recent years. What do you make of this phenomenon? What do you think, it's a good thing or a bad thing?
well, there are many stripes of Orthodox. There seems to be, to me, so I've sort of taken a stand on what I see as kind of a mysticism that's come into the church through programs and seminaries like spiritual formation. You have things like the Enneagram that I've spoken about. That is it, and it just has New Age occult roots to it. There's no doubt about that. But it's being incorporated in seminaries and churches and conferences, and it's shocking to me. So I see aspects of that in Eastern Orthodox. Some Orthodox religions, like the Russian Orthodox Church, is very, probably get a lot of hate mail on this one, is very much the tool of Vladimir Putin today. And one of his thought advisors, spiritual advisors, the guy named Alexander Dugin, often called Putin's Rasputin. So I'll carve out the Russian Orthodox Church. Although I will note, one of my Ukrainian friends sent me an icon. So there's a lot of iconography in the Orthodox Church. In the Russian Orthodox Church, they have an icon of a tank. So since this war started, so there's a huge spiritual component to this.
A tank.
A tank, yeah, a military tank.
Yeah.
TANK, yeah. And that was an icon being offered for sale recently in the Russian Orthodox Church. I've got a picture of it, and I trust the guy who sent it to me pretty much. So I don't know. I've always had a problem with what I sort of see this kind of mystical element in Eastern Orthodox that I am not comfortable with. And I see it in Catholicism as well. There's a lot of people converting, a lot of people on the right wing in America claiming to convert to Catholicism.
Yeah.
Where they usually end up is hating Israel and Jews. Yeah. And that's a problem. So I don't know. I can't answer the question directly. It's just that things about it seem kind of off to me. I've been through Orthodox churches, and I don't know. There's just some elements there that bother me. And I don't know if I can be entirely specific, but other than to say that this mystical element that I've kind of seen is something that I don't think is good for the church, because once you start opening that door, it's kind of hard to shut it for all the stuff that comes in with it. And I've written papers on mysticism coming into the evangelical church because it's here, and it's damaging theology, doctrine, and faith of a lot of people. And I can go around churches near us that are huge churches, and they're deep into this stuff. And now they're, quote, evangelical, not Orthodox, but I don't know. I think that's probably as much as I should say about it.
Yeah. I just wondered because, as I say, I've seen it quite a bit lately, and
Sure.
And also with the views against the millennial reign and against Israel, it tends to kind of all come together into this stuff, and maybe going back towards Romanism as well. It seems.
Here's a point I made early on with this October 7th thing. So that happened on Saturday, on Shabbat. That next day, I did a prophecy update, and I said that the issue of Israel would be the most divisive issue in the evangelical church until Jesus returned. And I think that's proving to be true. I also said somewhere along in here, at least this was my thinking, is that when it comes to the issue of Israel, we need to be very careful that we don't construct our theology in such as a way to justify our hatred of Jews in Israel. And I think you pointed out, I think I see that somewhat in the Orthodox Church. And so don't think that you're creating a clever theology to do what I think is really against what God has planned.
Yeah, it's the supersessionism, isn't it?
It certainly is, yeah.
Yeah.
And people do it because they think we're very clever. Look at this, we've got this biblical thing, and maybe you're not that clever,
Yeah, wow. Amazing things to see in this time. So much converging, as you said, and speeding up. It's hard to keep up sometimes in this day and age. And I just hope through these conversations that people can be aware of what's going on, but ultimately, as we said at the start, to be strong in our strength in the Lord Jesus Christ as these days unfold, and to have that peace of mind and heart in the midst of a world that's going into chaos, really.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on, John. And where can people find you?
YouTube at Fellowship Bible Chapel. You can get me on like X, and X is probably where I post the most. John Haller 54. I think I'm also on Getter. I think that's John Haller 1954. Guess what year I was born. And then I think True Social John Haller 54 also. And then Real FBC on Rumble. And I think we have an app for our church, Fellowship Bible Chapel. So, and then we have podcasts out there. So I don't really know where. YouTube is probably the main place, and Real FBC on Rumble.
And you do your prophecy updates on YouTube as well, don't you?
They're on YouTube. Yeah. There are certain topics that, you get a strike or you get disciplined by YouTube, and they want you to go to a little training session and that sort of thing. So make sure you got to answer the question. It's like one of those, you got to pick all the pictures with a bike or a bridge. It's sort of like you got to answer the questions correctly.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. It's sort of like, I'm 71. I don't need any more training. Thank you.
But it's good to be able to still make these videos, at least in some form. So, well, thank you very much. And I just hope that people will check you out, and appreciate you coming on. Thanks, John.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Are you searching for a podcast that discusses the most important issues of our day, all from a Christian perspective? Then add Rise Radio to your podcast playlist. Rise Radio explores topics that are shaping our world: philosophies, social narratives, belief systems, prophecies, strange phenomena, as well as spirituality. No topic is off limits. Rise Radio is about sharing the good news of Jesus Christ across the planet. Listen now on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, Buzzsprout, and wherever you get your podcast. Rise above the noise. Discover the truth. Tune into Rise Radio on your favorite podcast player right now.